It was a grey afternoon in March, one of those when the sea off Genoa looks as flat as a broken mirror. I had just finished hanging the laundry out on the balcony when the phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized, but something about the way it sounded, that dry, insistent rhythm, made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Bianchi," said a female voice, firm but hurried. "This is the San Martino Hospital. Your husband has been rushed to the operating room. He needs to come right away." I remember the words entering my head one by one like needle souls. I didn't even ask what had happened. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how. I just said, "I'm coming." Although I grabbed my bag, my keys, and the scarf I had hanging behind the door. I didn't put on makeup or comb my hair. It seemed to me that every second I lost could cost my husband Carlo his life. As I went down the stairs, I could hear the sound of my shoes echoing in the hallway like a metronome of fear. The road to the hospital was a corridor of horns and red lights. I still remember the reflection of the street lamps on the taxi's windshield, the fine rain falling obliquely, the silence of the driver who every now and then looked at me in the mirror without saying anything. I thought about Carlo, about how quickly he had left home that morning. "I have to go to the bank, then to work. Don't wait for me for lunch," he had said to me, distracted, putting on his leather jacket. In recent months, he had become restless, quieter. He had started locking his office, receiving phone calls that he would interrupt as soon as I entered the room. I had thought it was stress, or perhaps, deep down, I had not wanted to know. Now, however, every little detail came back to me like a series of alarms that I had ignored. When I arrived at the hospital, the neon light hit me like a punch. Everything seemed colder, more metallic. At the reception desk, a young woman in a blue uniform asked me my name. "Carlo Bianchi, admitted this afternoon," I said, trying not to let my voice tremble. She typed something on the computer, then looked at me with a look that I could not read. "Your husband is in the operating room on the second floor to the east. But you have to wait a moment, ma'am. There's an update in progress." An update, as if my husband were a piece of software. I sat down in the waiting room, my hands clasped around my bag. The chairs plastic, they were cold. The shiny floor reflected the neon lights like blades. In front of me stood a vending machine that had a peeling label on it, which simply read, "Espresso." Euro one foi. I stared at it for 10 minutes without moving. Each time the sliding door opened, I would lift my head, waiting in anticipation for someone to call out my name, but unfortunately nobody ever did. After 20 minutes of waiting, I decided not to wait any longer. I stood up and headed for the main corridor. I needed to see him, to know he was alive. The lights along the corridor were flickering, and the smell of disinfectant was so strong it burned your nostrils. Every door featured a small sign: general surgery, orthopedics, and cardiac surgery. When I saw the sign that read Operating Room 3, Restricted Access, I came to a complete stop. A figure in a white coat emerged from a side door. A young nurse with her hair pulled back and her bad hairdo askew. She saw me, and her eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected anyone there. "Madam, you can't stay here," he said softly, moving closer, but his tone wasn't authoritative. He was worried, almost frightened. "I'm Mr. Bianchi's wife," I replied. "They told me you're here in the operating room." She hesitated, looked at me for a long time, then leaned slightly toward me. "Are you really his wife?" The question hit me like a slap in the face. "Of course I am." The nurse took a step back and looked around herself, as if to make absolutely sure that nobody could overhear her. Then she said softly, "Then you have to come with me, right away." She didn't understand, but something in the way her hands were shaking made me obey without question. She grabbed my arm and dragged me behind a screen next to a trolley of surgical instruments. "Please." She whispered quickly, "Don't make any noise, and don't tell anyone you've arrived." But my husband tried to speak, but she silenced me with a look full of fear. "Madam, trust me, it's a trap." Those words hung in the air, heavy as lead. I didn't understand. A trap in a hospital? It seemed absurd to me, almost ridiculous. But then I saw his face, the tension in his shoulders, his labored breathing. He wasn't acting. I huddled behind the curtain, my heart pounding. I could hear footsteps, distant voices, the metallic sound of the wheels of a bed. A hoarse male voice said something, like, "Is everything ready? Bring him in." Another answered, "Signature coming in 10 minutes. Signature? What signature? I felt myself sinking. The nurse, kneeling beside me, grabbed my hand. "Don't move. If you come out now, they'll see you." "Who?" I whispered. She shook her head. "I can't explain it to you now, but your husband isn't here for an operation. You need to stay hidden until I tell you to come out." Her words cut through me like a scalpel. I looked toward the curtain. Through the crack, I saw two men in civilian clothes, not doctors, pushing a bed toward the operating room. They weren't carrying any medical records. They weren't wearing gloves. They didn't act like medical personnel, and yet they spoke with confidence, as if they were at home here. I suddenly felt cold. My hands were wet with sweat, everything. Everything I had believed up until that moment, the accident, the urgency, the fear, began to slip away like old paint. There was a crack. There was something deeply wrong, and in that very instant, without yet knowing why, I understood that my life would never be the same as it had been before. I have never forgotten the feeling of that moment. The acrid smell of disinfectant, the sound of the trolley of instruments vibrating on the floor, and the beating of my heart, so loud it seemed part of the sounds of the hospital. The nurse was crouched next to me, her hands thin but strong, her lips trembling, her lips. She was in her early 30s, maybe younger. Her name was Chiara. Chloe, briefly referring to her name tag pinned crookedly on her chest, said to me in an almost inaudible voice, "Madam, what's happening here is not an operation." Not yet. It's something different. My brain tried to make sense of it all, but the information slipped through my fingers like sand. And I had left the house less than an hour earlier, convinced that my husband was between life and death. And now I found myself hiding behind a screen, like a fugitive, while an unknown nurse begged me not to show myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run toward the operating room door and shout Carlo's name, but something in Chiara's voice and the fear that I could read in her eyes pinned me there more. "You must trust me," she continued, breathless. "If you go out, you'll put her in danger. Not just her. In danger," I whispered in a small voice. "But I just want to see my husband." Chiara stared at me, and for a moment I saw a sort of pity cross her face. "You'll see him, ma'am, but not in the way you think. Not now." Behind the screen, the noises multiplied. Quick footsteps, a sharp order, the metallic sound of a stretcher hitting a wall, then a calm, almost distracted male voice. "Where's the lady's signature? Without it, we can't proceed." Another voice answered, lower down. "Don't worry, they'll bring her in soon." Everything's sorted. I felt faint. My signature. What kind of intervention required my signature and not my presence? I looked at Chiara, who had turned pale. She nodded slowly, as if she had already understood what I was thinking. She took me by the wrist and whispered, "Come with me. If we stay here, they'll find out." She dragged me down a side hallway, the kind reserved strictly for the staff. The neon lights flickered on late, casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts. We passed by a laboratorio, then a fire door. Every time we caught the sound of footsteps, she pressed me against the wall and held her breath. I mirrored her movements, though I did not understand why. I felt my heart beating with such intensity that I feared the others would hear it as well. When we finally came to a stop, we found ourselves in a small room crowded with medical records and old monitors. Chiara shut the door behind her and turned to face me, her forehead covered in beads of sweat. "I do not know where I should begin," she said. "However, I must tell you the truth, even though I know I shouldn't." I sat down in the nearest chair, my sleeves shaking. "Please speak." She drew in a deep breath. "The man who was brought in today was never properly registered as an emergency room patient. He arrived accompanied by two people, not doctors, and asked to use a room under a false name." I immediately noticed something strange because she looked down. "Why did I see your photo in the file, ma'am? Your photo next to a Newson form signed with your signature, but you weren't the one who signed it." I stood there, unable to breathe. What do you mean?" Your husband introduced a woman as Mrs. Bianchi. Chiara's voice cracked. And that woman signed the medical documents which authorized the private procedure and a transfer funds from the family account over to a health insurance provider återstående. A huge sum. I felt the floor give way beneath me for a second or second. Everything spun. My head, the lights, even the words. Carlo, my Carlo, who took another woman to sign in my place at a hospital, just for the sake of money. But why? Why wasn't I contacted then? Because someone gave instructions not to call you. They said you were abroad, and the administration, ma'am. Well, in Italy, certain matters are concluded with a stamp and a handshake, but I looked into it and realized that the photograph inside the file was not of you. I put my hands to my face. Everything inside me rebelled against that reality, but a clearer, older part of me was starting to put the pieces together. Carlos' last months, the interrupted phone calls, the sudden exits, these silences at the table, the excuses. It's work. It's just stress. It's age. No, it wasn't stress. It was preparation. Chiara passed me a glass of water, my hands shaking so much that half of it spilled onto my pants. You have to leave, the young woman said, with sudden calm. If they see you, they'll understand that something has gone wrong, and they won't stop. They won't stop, I repeated, unable to think. Who? The men who are with your husband don't work for the hospital. I saw them 2 weeks ago with another patient, and there too there were false documents, but this time it's different. This time there's insurance involved, a large sum. And if you stay, Mom, they could make you disappear as if you never existed. The words, make her disappear, made me feel sick. I looked toward the window, but it looked out onto a closed courtyard. No way out. So what do I do? Chiara came closer, her face inches from mine. Pretend nothing happened. Leave here as if you were nothing more than a visitor who got lost. Go home, but first give me your number. If I can get any evidence, I'll call you. Her hands were shaking as she handed me a small piece of paper. She tore it from a notebook that said General Surgery Department, Night Shift. A number had been written hastily in blue pen on it. I folded it and hid it in the sleeve of my jacket. A moment later, we heard voices outside the door. 2 men were talking in a low voice. One of them said, "Check if your wife has arrived. We have to sign in half an hour before the manager changes shift." Chiara turned pale, motioned for me to be quiet, moved to a metal cabinet and opened it. Inside were clean sheets and nurses' uniforms. And she tossed me one of those light blue smocks. Wear this if they see us. It should look like you work it here. I pulled it on over my clothes, my fingers stiff, my throat dry. The sound of footsteps getting closer. The 2 men stopped in front of the door. One knocked. Chiara gestured it toward the wall, indicating that I should stand behind a shelf. I obeyed. "Yes," she said, trying to sound calm. "There's a problem with the sign-in book. Mr. Bianchi wants to make sure everything is in order. Have you seen the lady?" "No," she replied, sounding almost bored. Maybe she's down at the front desk." There was a brief silence, then a cough and footsteps that moved away. When the sound had faded away, Chiara collapsed into a chair, exhausted. "I can't protect you for much longer, ma'am. I'm already taking a huge risk." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "But why are you helping me?" He smiled slightly, a sad smile. "Because my mother was her age, and she too believed a man who lied to her for years. I don't want another woman to end up the same way." We remained silent for an incomprehensible amount of time. Outside, the neon lights continued to flicker. Something inside me was changing. Fear was turning into clarity. The terrified woman who had run to the hospital was gone. In her place, a part of me that I didn't know was beginning to emerge, colder, older, perhaps more real, perhaps more. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and said quietly, "Okay, Chiara, I'll trust her, but if it really is a trap, I won't leave without understanding why." She looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. "Then she must be ready to see things she won't be able to forget," she nodded. "I'm not afraid to remember anymore." Barwa opened the door slowly. It peered into the corridor, then motioned for me to follow her. As we walked with our shoes sliding on the polished floor, my mind raced back and forth, desperately searching for a foothold. But it was already far too late for me to have any doubts. And when we reached the end of the corridor, where a large mirror reflected the white light of the hospital, I saw my face, for the first time, in my nurse's uniform. Paro. I no longer looked like a grieving wife. I looked like a witness to something she should never have seen. And it was at that very moment that I heard that hoarse voice again, coming from the room next door. "Bring him in. In 10 minutes, the signature will be ready." 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes, I understood my life would change direction forever. I walked behind Chiara, my sweaty hands hidden in the pockets of my blue tunic that smelled of disinfectant and fear. The hospital corridor seemed truly endless, all identical, white and cold, as if the flow of time had come to a complete stop in there. Each step resounded against the tiles, an echo that led me to believe that someone might be following behind us. I didn't dare look back. Chiara was moving quickly but carefully. He knew every detour, every shortcut. He motioned for me to stop beside a large panel of frosted glass which served to separate the operating department from a room used for preparation. "You can see from here without being seen," he murmured. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe calmly. Through the frosted glass I could make out shadows, figures that were moving in and out, lights that flickered on and off, and metal instruments that were flashing for just a brief second. Then, suddenly I saw something that made my blood run cold. 2 men, the ones I had glimpsed earlier, were entering the room pushing a trolley. They weren't doctors. You could tell from the way they moved, too confident, too fast, as if they didn't have to answer to anyone. They were wearing lab coats over dark clothes, and one of them was holding a telephone, speaking in a low voice. Chiara tugged gently on my sleeve. "She didn't move," she whispered. "Now you'll understand." A man in a green lab coat appeared from a side door, a mask pulled down over his chin. He had the appearance of a surgeon, but his demeanor was that of a common bureaucrat. He was talking to the 2 new arrivals, and from what they said, he understood that they weren't discussing health, but signatures, documents, and timing. "The notary is waiting in room 3, said one of the men. "But if the lady doesn't arrive, we'll have to proceed without witnesses since the forms are already ready." I grabbed hold of the edge of the wall. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid that the noise alone would catch me. The forms, the signatures, everything made sense. This wasn't surgery, it was a setup, and I was the target. Suddenly, Chiara leaned forward, her eyes fixed on something behind the glass. "Look," she whispered. I followed her gaze and saw my husband, sitting in a chair, wearing a gown open at the back, but completely conscious. He was talking to the men. He had no injuries, there were no doctors around him, no monitors on, no heartbeat to check, just a table, a folder, and his calm, firm voice. "So, ubirua. She'll come, I'm sure of it. She's never lacked anything, especially when it comes to me." Chiara held back a groan. I, on the other hand, felt a sudden emptiness inside me, as if someone had taken the air out of me. I looked at that man, my lifelong companion, with whom I had shared 40 years of dinners, parties, illnesses, projects, and I couldn't recognize him. There was no fear in his eyes, no pain, just a cold control, a calm that hurt me more than any betrayal. One of the men opened the folder on the table and said, "Sign here, Mr. Bianchi. Then we'll take care of sorting out the wife's part." Carlo took the pen without hesitation. "Just make sure that the transfers do start by tonight," she answered. That word exploded in my head like a bullet. You feel your throat burn, but Chiara grabbed my wrist before I could take a step forward. "No," she hissed. "If she sees her, everything will collapse. She has to understand before she acts." "Understand what?" The voice managed to whisper that it's not just about her. This man, her husband, has organized something that involves both her name and her assets. He has falsified documents, and that entire fake operation is nothing more than a mere cover. I turned to her, incredulous. But why? Why would he do this? Chiara looked down. "I don't know, but there are others like him. And I've seen too many forms disappear, too many signatures appear where they shouldn't. But today is different, because she and I are witnesses." We remained silent, while behind the glass, the three men continued to talk. One showed a tablet with digital signatures and Carlo nodded as if he were overseeing a project not his own. Downfall. Then I heard another voice coming from the corridor. Male, more authoritative. Are you ready for the operation? The bureaucratic surgeon answered immediately. Yes, doctor, soon. We are just completing the procedures. Sara pulled a magnetic key from her pocket. This opens the side door. If anything happens, run in that direction and take the emergency stairs. Don't stop for anyone. I stared at her without speaking. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes weren't. At that moment, I understood that the girl was risking her job, perhaps her career. For me, why is she doing that? I asked again. She smiled slightly. Why would someone do this? And why is it that I cannot bear to see men who believe they can just erase a woman with a single signature? A sudden noise made us jump. The door to the operating room burst open, and one of the men came out into the corridor. He was holding a brown folder. He looked right and left, then approached us. Chiara pushed a cart covered with a sheet behind me. I crouched under it, holding my breath. The sound of her footsteps was slow, rhythmic. I heard the click of her foot, lighter, then the smell of smoke. He was a few meters away from me. The lady isn't coming, is she? He said to someone on the phone. No problem. There's a solution ready. We have the signature. All we have to do is hand the documents to the fictitious notary and disappear. Then he laughed. A short, nervous laugh, but full of certainty. When he walked away, Chiara gestured for me to leave. My knees were stiff. My hands were cold. Now we have to go, she said, but I didn't move. I was still gazing through the glass completely, unable to turn my eyes away. Carlo had just put down his pen, ran a hand through his hair, and stood up relaxed, like someone who has just finished a deal. The others patted him on the shoulder. It's done, one said. Now we just have to wait for the official news to arrive. And his wife? The other asked, laughing. Carlo answered softly, but I heard him anyway. He doesn't suspect anything. She's never suspected anything. Those words cut me more than any knife. Chiara took my arm. Come away, he insisted. It's dangerous to stay. I let myself be dragged along, but my mind was spinning. Every step in the corridor seemed heavier. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I wanted to confront him, but I knew it would be useless. He had already decided everything, prepared every detail. I was just a name on a piece of paper, a signature on which to build his escape. When we reached a side exit, Chiara stopped and looked at her watch. The shift change will arrive in a few minutes. I have to go back inside, otherwise they'll notice my absence. You go out that door and follow the stairs to the ground floor. No one will stop you if you walk decided. And you? I asked. I'll try to let you know when I have proof, but for now, disappear. I didn't know how to thank you. I took her hand and squeezed it tightly. Chiara, if I don't see you again, she interrupted me, shaking her head. You will see me again, Mom, but only when you're ready to know everything. Then she turned and disappeared behind the door, leaving me alone. I stood still for a few seconds with the lights of the corridor was shaking above me. I could still hear Carlo's laughter in my ears, the laughter I would have recognized among 1,000, now so cold and distant. I took a step towards the exit. Every cell in my body was screaming to run away, but a part of me, the part that had lived a lifetime alongside that man, still wanted to understand, wanted to see with its own eyes how far he had gone. So I crept back. I moved slowly, leaning against the walls, avoiding the cameras. I approached the operating room again. The door was left ajar. The table inside was completely empty. The men had disappeared, but resting upon the steel surface forgotten by all lay. The brown folder lay. I approached it, my heart in my throat, and opened it. Inside were copies of legal documents, brokers, property deeds, bank statements, even the insurance policy for our house in my name, but with a signature I had never traced. I couldn't breathe. I leaned on the table to keep from falling. At the bottom of the folder, I found a printed photo of Carlo and I at our wedding anniversary party. 2 years earlier, written in pen on it, was, "It all begins here. It was at that moment that I understood that it wasn't just a question of betrayal or greed. It was something deeper, and that the woman I had been up until that day, trusting, blind, in love, had died right there, under the cold light of San Martino. I took the folder, tucked it under my jacket, and left the hospital. The rain greeted me like a liberation, but also like an omen. I didn't look back. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The rain fell in thin, almost transparent streams, and mixed with the tears that I didn't realize were on my face. The lights of the street lamps reflected upon the wet asphalt, turning every single puddle into the image of a flickering mirror. I had clutched the folder under my jacket, like you might clutch a newborn baby or a bomb. I didn't know what it was yet, but I felt that inside was the key to everything. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Genova, following my instincts more than logic. I didn't want to take a taxi. I didn't want to go home right away. I needed space, silence, to fit together the pieces of a puzzle I still didn't understand. My husband, a fake surgery, and a woman I did not know who had pretended to be me. Every thought was a blow to the stomach. When I finally arrived home, it was already almost 9 o'clock in the evening. The apartment was immersed in an eerie silence, interrupted only by the ticking of the wall clock. I took off my coat, completely soaked in, and let it fall to the floor. I sat down at the kitchen table, turned on the small lamp, and slowly opened the folder. The documents were neatly, almost obsessively, arranged. Each sheet was numbered, each signature in the same place. There were bank forms, noted bank statements with figures I had never seen before. Some bore my signature, perfectly imitated, but the detail that made me shiver was a private health insurance form and authorization for the withdrawal of funds in the event of the death of the spouse. The beneficiary, Carlo Bianchi, and the signature, mine, or rather, the one that was supposed to be mine, made me faint. It wasn't just a financial betrayal, it was a plan constructed down to the smallest detail to erase me. And today's surgery had never existed. It was just a way to activate the procedure, to make people believe that Carlo was the patient and I was the absent wife who needed to be authorized. I thought back to Chiara's words, the urgency with which she had hidden me, her frightened face. Her frightened face? She's not here for an operation. It's a trap. Now everything made cruel sense. I got up and went to Carlo's office. It had always been his kingdom, accounting books, receipts, files. Inside, a maniacal order reigned that I had always respected, almost as if it were a matter of simple marital habit. But that evening, I no longer had respect for anything. He opened every drawer, every folder, every diary. After 20 minutes, found a package tied with smiltforen, hidden behind a series of tax files. I cut it open with a paper knife and saw what I feared, copies of the same forged signatures, and in the middle of them, a passport medallion with a photo of my husband, but with a different name, Giulio Carini. I couldn't breathe. Giulio Carini. I read it out loud, as if saying it would make it less real. There was also a plane ticket to Lisbon, which was dated 2 weeks later. It was a one-way ticket. I sat down slowly. My hands were shaking, but my mind had become cold and entirely clear. The man with whom I had shared 40 years of my life was about to disappear with my money, my name, and a false identity. He had planned everything, and probably if it hadn't been for that young nurse, I would never have known anything. I opened the folder again and found a sheet of paper different from the others. It was not a bank form, but a letter, written by hand in Carlo's neat slanted script just in case. The header read. I read it slowly, each word cutting like a blade. If one day someone should ask for me, tell them I suffered a sudden illness. I will protect you as best as I am able to, but I can no longer stay here. I can't share what I've built with someone who doesn't know what it means to survive. I'm sorry, but the time for love is over. Now the time for survival begins. No signature, no goodbye, just that final sentence. The time for love is over. I felt like laughing, but it was an empty laugh, without sound. The man I had loved was saying goodbye to me like closing a contract. There were no emotions, only calculation. But in his perfect plan, he had forgotten one thing. I was still alive, and I wasn't the kind of woman who accepts ruin in silence. I picked up the phone and dialed Chiara's number. No answer. I tried again, but the line remained silent. So I wrote a short message. I have proof I need to talk to her. She answered only an hour later. I can't write. Tomorrow shift at 7 o'clock. Come to the bar across from the hospital. I spent the night awake, sitting on the couch with the folder on my knees. Every now and then I got up and looked out the window. The sea was black still. I thought of Carlo, perhaps still in the hospital or perhaps already elsewhere. I wondered if she would sleep peacefully, if she had felt at least a shred of remorse, but then I remembered her cold gaze, the calm voice in which she spoke of me as if I were a problem to be solved, and I understood that no, she would never feel anything. At dawn I dressed carefully, as I hadn't done in a long time. Dark trousers, a gray sweater, a long coat. I didn't want to seem like a desperate woman, but a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. I left the house with the folder in my bag and walked to the bar that Chiara had indicated to me. It was one of those old places with chipped cups and the smell of coffee mingling with cigarette smoke. She was already there, sitting in a corner, her face tired, her dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she immediately stood up. "Madam, I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner. Last night they closed the wing where we were. Someone must have discovered that I had let an unauthorized visitor out. I took her hand. It doesn't matter. But I found this." She opened her bag and I showed her the folder. Chiara leafed through it quickly, her eyes darting from page to page. "Oh my God," she muttered. "This is a perfect scam." He was pretending to be patient to make the medical procedure appear legitimate, but in reality he just wanted to validate his wife's signature in front of hospital witnesses. That way he could have transferred the assets without me ever noticing. Exactly. And the health insurance is just a facade. In reality, there's life insurance behind it. A policy that only comes into effect in the event of the spouse's death. I looked at her in silence. "Does that mean he wanted me to?" Chiara lowered her voice. "I can say for sure, but yes, it could be like that." I felt myself freeze. Everything inside me froze. For a moment, I wasn't in a bar anymore, but back in that cold room, with the white lights and the clanking of metal. He didn't just want my money, he wanted to erase me. I stood up slowly, breathing hard. "I have to go," I said. "I have to sort this out before he disappears." Chiara stood up too. "Wait, don't do anything on your own. They're organized, they know how to move. If you act impulsively, you risk ending up in a trap." "Meh. Don't worry," I replied with a cold smile. "I won't act impulsively. I'll do exactly what he did to me. Take it easy." I left her there, while the bar filled with noise and voices. As I left, I noticed that the rain had stopped. The air smelled of iron and salt. I looked out to sea, and for the first time in years, I felt an emptiness inside me that was not frightening, but clear. Love was over, as he said, but not my story. And so, as the sun began to rise over the rooftops of Genoa, I made the decision that would change everything. I would expose my husband, but not in court, not in front of a judge. I would do it in the most painful way for him, showing him that the woman he had tried to destroy was much more alive and more cunning than he had ever imagined. I had never felt a silence like the one that enveloped me when I returned home that afternoon. It was a thick silence, like fog full of things left unsaid. Every object in our house seemed different, foreign. The sofa where we had watched movies for years, the mug with the words "I love you, stubborn old woman" written on it, the books on the nightstand, everything seemed to me like the scenery of a life that no longer belonged to me. I took off my coat, hung it up slowly, then stopped in the middle of the living room as if trying to figure out where the lie was hidden, la bille. But the lie wasn't hidden, it was everywhere. I remembered the plane ticket to Lisbon. 2 weeks, that was the limit. I had 14 days to figure it out, take action, and turn the situation around. Not for revenge, not yet, but to survive. I locked myself in the study and turned on the old computer that Carlo only used for accounting work. Ling, The password was always the same, the date of our anniversary, 04198. I almost laughed. Even in betrayals. Men are rarely original. There were dozens of folders on the desktop. I opened the most recent one, Invoices 2024. Inside were files renamed with obsessive care. Savona property, private insurance transfer, of shares transfer. With every click, a piece of my trust was torn away forever. Among the documents, I found a preliminary sales contract for an apartment I didn't know, registered to a company based in Milan, Carini Investments, SRL. His name was E. Enough for me. Giulio Carini, his new self, his new world. But what struck me was a seemingly insignificant PDF attachment noticed. Personal notes, PDF. He opened it. It was a list. Cold, tidy, frightening. You must convince Linda to sign the proxy by March 15. Please register the Lisbon deed via Contact B and transfer all the funds in 3 steps. Operation code LC88. Delete original documentation. After confirmation. Final communication. Only if necessary. I stopped at the last line. Only if necessary. He didn't explain what it meant, but I knew. It was a euphemism, a way of saying, if she doesn't sign, find a way to silence her. He covered my mouth with his hand, trying not to throw up. I was sitting in front of the evidence that my husband was not only stealing my life, but he had even considered the possibility of taking it away from me entirely. I don't know how long I sat there, motionless, staring at the screen. When the sun began to set behind the buildings, I calmly got up and made the most difficult decision. I would pretend not to know until then. The right moment. At 6 o'clock, sharp, I heard the keys turning in the lock. Carlo had returned, with the same scent of aftershave and that same heavy, measured step. He came in, as always throwing the keys on the silver tray, and sighing like a tired man after a long day. You're here, he said. I thought you'd gone out. I looked at him. It was raining too much, I replied, smiling softly. Have you eaten anything? I wasn't hungry. I sat down at the table while he went into the kitchen to pour himself a glass of wine. I said in a light voice. Today I received a strange phone call from the San Martino hospital. They said you had taken a sudden illness. He stiffened for just a second, but that was enough. Then he turned around with a studied smile. A mistake, I think. I accompanied a colleague for a checkup. Maybe they mixed up the names. I replied, feigning indifference. It's strange they even gave your full name. Carlo Bianchi. It must have been the work documents, he replied, shrugging. Do you know how bureaucracy is in this country? He took a divine sip and sat down across from me. Why are you looking at me like that? He asked, smiling. As if I knew something I shouldn't have done. No, I tilted my head. And you did something I shouldn't have known about? There was a moment of silence, brief but expected. Then he laughed. That low, controlled laugh that had always irritated me. Linda, are you tired? Do you need help? To sleep? You're starting to imagine things. Imagine. If only he had known how little I actually needed to imagine things. I waited for him to lock himself in the bedroom before catching my breath. I heard him turn on the TV, then the shower. I moved silently, like a thief, and went to the closet. There, hidden behind a shoebox, I found the old leather suitcase that I used on the trips of my youth. Inside, I tucked away the folder, the laptop computer, and a few articles of clothing. I hadn't decided yet where I would go, but I knew I wouldn't stay there. Before closing the suitcase, I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote a few words. Don't wait up for me, I've understood everything. I left it on the table, under the ashtray that he always used, not as a message from God, but as a trap. I wanted to see how he would react. I took refuge for the night with an old friend, Teresa, a lonely woman who lived in an apartment above the port. When I told her half of the story, she stopped me immediately. Don't say anything else. The more you talk, the more you are at risk. Tomorrow you'll go by the police. I shook my head. Not yet. First, I want to see how far it goes. The next morning, at 8 o'clock, I received Carlo's first call. I didn't answer. Then a message came. Linda, what's that note? Where are you? Can we talk? 3 more messages came in the next few minutes. Then silence. I opened the window and looked out to sea. The wind carried the smell of seaweed and gasoline. It almost seemed ironic to me. I had spent my entire life trusting a man who couldn't even swim, and now I was the one navigating the unknown. Around noon, I decided to sneak back home. I wanted to see what he had done after reading my message. When I arrived, the door was ajar. I tiptoed in. The kitchen was a mess. Drawers open, paper scattered, the chair overturned. On the floor, my note torn in two. I slowly approached and saw something that made my blood run cold. On the table, in place of my note, there was a new, very short letter. You can't win. There was his handwriting, and next to it, a half-full glass of wine with a small brass key inside. I picked it up with 2 fingers. I knew what that key was for. His private office in the city, the one he kept rented so he could concentrate. I was sure I would find the rest there. As I stepped back out into the falling rain, I felt that something deep inside me had broken forever. I was no longer the faithful wife who believed in redemption, nor the wounded woman seeking explanations. I had become the witness to a crime that was bearing my own name. I decided that I would go all the way, not to destroy him, but to stop him from destroying me. And so, with the key in my fist, I took a taxi to Bobby's street where the Carini Investments office was located. I didn't know what I would find behind that door, but I knew that whatever it was would change everything, because there was an even deeper truth that I had not wanted to admit. The trap had not begun in the hospital. It had begun much earlier. Only I, being blinded by love, had made the choice not to see it for what it was, Nas. Via Balbi was one of the oldest streets in Genoa, narrow and gloomy, with noble palaces that cast long and cold shadows upon the narrow stone sidewalks of the city. The dull windows were reflecting the distant sea, appearing like blades of steel. I walked slowly, holding the brass key clenched in my fist, like a weapon. The studio belonging to Carlo, or rather to Giulio Carini, was located on the 3rd floor of a Baroque building, right next to an old shop selling frames. The sign on the intercom was discreet: Studio Carini, Financial Consulting. I stopped in front of the door. For a moment I thought about turning back. I was afraid of what I would find, but then I remembered his letter that you can't win, written with such arrogance, and the fear transformed into something clearer, a fiercer calm. I went inside. The stairs were narrow, featuring rusty iron railings, while the scent of mold mingled with the aroma of coffee that drifted upward from the floors located down below. Every step echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. When I arrived in front of the door with the sign Studio Carini, the key slid into the lock without any effort at all. It clicked sharply, precisely, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside there was complete silence. In the large room, which had pearl gray walls, a large polished wooden table in the center, and shelves filled with numbered folders. On the main wall hung a map of Europe marked with various red pushpins: Milan, Zurich, Lisbon, and Nice. On the table was a laptop newched on, its screen still lit. The cursor was blinking on a Word document titled Final Operation Review. I approached slowly, my heart in my throat. But before I could touch the keyboard, I heard a noise behind me, the sharp click of the lock closing. I turned around abruptly, and there, standing in the doorway, with an expression I will never forget, was him, Carlo, alive, intact, elegant as ever, but with a different shade in his eyes, a darkness I had never seen before. Linda said, her voice calm, almost affectionate. I thought you would come here. I caught my breath. How did you know about the key? He smiled slightly. You can't believe I didn't know where you keep things. I know you better than you know yourself. I leaned against the table to keep from falling. What's all this? He approached her, slowly, like a predator measuring the distance from its prey. He gestured toward the documents and the computer. This is the future, mine, and if I had collaborated, yours too. I repeated, in disbelief. You forged my signature. Did you organize a scam? You pretended to be sick, and you talk about collaboration. Don't call it a scam, he replied, raising his voice slightly. It's just a way to fix things. The system eats us up, Linda. The taxes, the banks, the wasted years. I just found a way out. I don't want to die in this gray city waiting for retirement. I took a step closer, my eyes fixed on his, and the way out was to steal everything from me, use my name, my life. He ran a hand through his hair, as he always did when he tried to maintain control. I didn't want it to end like this, but you don't understand. You've never understood how the real world works. I kept you out to protect you. Those words almost made me laugh. Protect me, I whispered. Protect me from what, Carlo? From you? He paused. For a second I saw something cross his face. Maybe anger, maybe fear. Then he spoke softly, but in a tone I had never heard before. He just had to sign. Everything was arranged. We could start over somewhere else in Portugal. I already have contacts there. But you, as always, had to interfere. Chiara, the young nurse, came to mind. Maybe he had already discovered her. Maybe she knew I hadn't arrived by chance. I wondered if she was safe. You even used my own doctor and the hospital to cover up your lies, I said, while attempting to keep my voice steady and controlled. Do you know what awaits you now? He leaned closer. Don't do it, Linda. Don't ruin everything now. Just think, we could still run away together. There are accounts in your name, documents ready. You wouldn't even have to work another day. We could live well, far from all this. Far from what, Carlo? From the truth. It was that sentence that made me realize that there was nothing left to save. The man I had loved was long gone. In his place, there was only a stranger who spoke of survival like a thief and of love, like a bank transaction. I took a step back. Do you know what I think, Carlo? What? That the only one who was truly sick was you, and that this is the only operation you really planned, an operation to cut me out of your life. He looked at me silently, then shook his head. If you leave now, you will have nothing left. Maybe, I replied, but at least it's mine, amen. There was a long moment when we stood motionless, a few feet apart, like two strangers bound by a past that no longer existed. Then he slowly turned to the table, picked up a USB stick, and put it in his pocket. This is the only copy, he said. You won't be able to prove it to me. I smiled. You are wrong. I pulled my phone out of my coat and turned it toward him. I had recorded the entire conversation. For the first time, his face changed, the color draining from his cheeks. You, he stammered. You've always underestimated silence, Carlo. But silence is only useful for those who know when to speak. He took a step forward, but I moved first. Grabbing the flash drive from the table, I put it in my bag and ran for the door. Linda, he shouted, you don't know who you're up against. With you, I replied, turning around. I left the studio and went down the stairs 2 steps at a time. I could hear his footsteps behind me, but he didn't reach me. When I reached the street, a mulled wind hit my face. I slipped through the afternoon crowd, breathing hard but alive and well. I walked for miles to the old port. I sat on a bench watching the Zolnimura ripple under the dark clouds. I had the flash drive, the proof, Carlo's voice etched into the phone. I had everything, but I felt empty. I realized that the hardest part wouldn't be reporting him or exposing him. The hardest part would be living with the idea that the man next to me was a woman. He had been acting for me for 40 years. The phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Bianchi, I'm Chiara. See you tomorrow. There's something you need to know. I read it 3 times. Something you need to know. I looked around. The sun was setting, and the wind carried the scent of the sea and iron. I got up slowly. I had faced the deception, the fear, the truth, but I felt that it wasn't over. There was still a deeper level. Something Carlo hadn't told me. Something the young nurse had discovered, and that for some reason she hadn't been able to tell me before. And as I walked back home with the key clutched in my hand, I understood that the operation wasn't just a metaphor. It was a precise surgical plan constructed like scalpel to cut away every trace of me, my name, my possessions, my memory. Only he had forgotten one thing. I was still here, and I had nothing left to lose. He hardly slept that night. I tossed and turned in bed, for hours, my mind racing in circles like a trapped animal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carlo's face in his office, the calmness with which he had spoken to me, that voice, that he never trembled, not even in the face of evidence. He seemed convinced that he had done nothing wrong. Perhaps, in his twisted way, he didn't really believe he was. At 5 in the morning, I got up, unable to stay still. I made a strong, bitter coffee and drank it standing in front of the window. The city was still immersed in a milky darkness. The lights of the fishing boats in the port drew flickering lines on the water. It was as if Genoa was breathing in its sleep, unaware of all that was about to emerge. I dressed calmly, choosing simple, dark clothes. I grabbed my bag with my flash drive and phone and left the house before sunrise. The bar in front of the San Martino hospital was almost empty when I arrived. There's the barista, an elderly woman who was making cappuccinos with an automatic gesture, and a sleepy boy who was reading the newspaper. Chiara arrived 10 minutes later. Then the message stated, her face pale, and her eyes marked by the presence of deep, dark circles beneath them. She was still wearing her uniform, under an overcoat that was too big, light from the morning chill. He saw me and approached without greeting. He sat down across from me and ordered just a glass of water. His hand was shaking slightly. "Excuse me about the hour," he said softly. "I couldn't call you earlier. They took me off the night shift yesterday without explanation. I have the feeling that someone is monitoring my every move." "Carlo?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think I'm not alone." The words made my blood run cold. "Is not alone?" Chiara leaned toward me, lowering her voice. "Ever since I helped her hide, I've started to notice things I hadn't connected before. Patients registered under different names, but with the same insurance number. Identical signatures on consent forms. Doctors who suddenly disappear after raising concerns. It's a system, ma'am, and your husband is just one piece of it." I stared at her in disbelief. "You mean he's part of something bigger, bigger?" She nodded. "Yes, a network of healthcare and financial scams uses the identities of patients, often elderly, widowed, single people, to take out life insurance policies and investments abroad. In return, the accomplices receive commissions. The hospital isn't officially involved, but some employees turn a blind eye in exchange for money. I've seen forms change hands without checking. Documents disappear from the system. It's all orchestrated in a precise way." I felt goosebumps run down my arms. "And Carlo?" Chiara took a deep breath. "He was one of those who they'd recruited victims. People he knew in his social circle, women with properties, bank accounts, pensions. He created trust, built relationships, and then had them sign false documents. In some cases, he had assets registered in their name to protect their savings, but she was different." "Different," I repeated almost in a low voice. "Yeah, she wasn't supposed to be just a signature. She had to be the perfect to cover a respectable name, a wife, then no one would suspect, but then something went wrong." Maybe someone betrayed him. Maybe he himself made the wrong move. Although the operation in the hospital was certainly needed to complete the final step, transfer everything to her false name and make her appear incapacitated or worse, dead due to medical error. I felt myself freeze. "Are you telling me they really wanted to make me disappear?" Chiara looked me in the eyes, and at that moment she understood that there was no need for an answer. The truth was all there, in her silence. We sat for long seconds in which time seemed to dredge the lights of the bar, reflected off the cups, and the noise of the cars began to fade, going outside, a sign that the city was waking up. Then Chiara began to speak almost in a whisper. "Last night, after she had gone away, I received a phone call from an anonymous person. A male voice told me to stay quiet, saying that they knew where I lived and were aware of the fact that I had spoken with her." "Oh my God," I muttered. "Chiara has to leave. She has to get to safety." She shook her head. "I can't. Not until I see these people pay. I've already made copies of the documents. I saved them on a secure server. But we need definitive proof, the kind that only she can provide." She opened her bag and pulled out a transparent plastic folder. Inside there were photographs, copies of signatures, medical forms, and bank receipts. But what truly made me hold my breath was the first page, a document bearing the letterhead of a specific Swiss insurance agency. On the contract, under the beneficiary heading, it said Carini, Giulio, surviving spouse, and under the insured heading, Bianchi Linda, deceased on a date. To be determined, deceased on a date. To be determined, nahanete be determined. I put a hand to my mouth. This is the form that her husband supposedly signed after the fake operation. It was dated 3 days before the call she received from the hospital. My blood was pounding in my ears. Everything was coming back. Carlo hadn't improvised anything. He had planned my disappearance down to the last detail. The hospitalization, the non-existent operation, the fake signature, even the emergency call to take me there. Everything was to get me into the system as a clinical case so that my death would turn out to be a medical error covered by insurance. All it would take was a document, a forged signature, and I would become a name on a certificate. Chiara was staring at me. I know it's difficult, but we have to act now. I have a contact at the judicial police. If we hand over the USB stick with the recording and this file, they can open an international investigation. But you have to be the one to report it, Mom. No one can do it for you. I suddenly felt tired, as if I had aged by 10 years within the span of a single hour. I looked at the cup in front of me, empty, with the dregs of cold, bitter coffee. I don't know if I still have the strength. Chiara took mine, and she has the strength. And as she has had it so far. Don't stop now. Not after all this. It was at that moment that she understood that I was not just a victim, and that my story would not end up in a dusty file, but would become proof that no one, not even a husband with the heart of stone, can erase a life with a lie, a lie. I took the folder from her, put it in my bag, and stood up. Let's go. Chiara looked at me in surprise. Now? I said, yes. Now, before anyone else gets there, we went out together into the cold morning. The air smelled of rain and gasoline. Traffic was starting to form, and the sun was peeking out from behind the low clouds. We walked without speaking for a few minutes. Then Chiara stopped. Madam, if anything were to happen to me, go to the Guardia di Finanza headquarters on Via Andeco Settembre. Ask for Inspector Gallo. Tell him to come to me. Don't talk nonsense, I replied, trying to smile. Nothing will happen, but inside me I felt a cold foreboding, like a current rising from the earth. And as we were crossing the street, I could not help but think that perhaps Carlo had never actually acted it on his own accord. I didn't know yet that within 24 hours I would discover how deep the network ran, and that the truth about my husband was just the surface of a much larger abyss. We walked in silence along Corso Gastaldi towards the hospital. The traffic was moving slowly, the cars like tired animals crawling through the light drizzle of rain. Chiara kept her coat tightly wrapped around her, her gaze fixed ahead, as if every sound could be a threat. I had my bag over my shoulder. The weight of the flash drive and the documents felt like a boulder. We didn't speak. There was no need. We both knew that we were walking towards something bigger than ourselves. When we arrived at the hospital gate, Chiara paused for just a brief moment and then looked up. The windows of the surgical ward were illuminated by a faint dim light. Greenish. We can go through the main entrance, she said. Too many eyes. Then follow me. We crossed the side courtyard, the one where all the supply trucks were typically parked. The smell of disinfectant and diesel fuel filled the air. Chiara pulled a magnetic badge out from her coat pocket and then swiped it across the reader located next to a service door. The mechanism clicked. We went inside. The interior was deserted. The flashing lights produced an almost unreal effect, as though we were trapped inside of a dream. Or perhaps a nightmare. Why are we coming back here? I asked her quietly. Because part of the evidence is in the internal system. If we can download the admissions logs and the digital signatures, we'll have confirmation that everything was tampered with. Then we go to the police. I nodded, although a shiver was running down my own spine. We walked down an empty corridor. Each door had a number and a label. Some were ajar. From one came the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, from another the distant sound of someone crying. Each step seemed heavier than the last. We arrived in front of a service elevator. Chiara punched in a code. The doors opened. Floor 3, she said. Health Administration. As we climbed, the noise of the engine drowned out our breathing. I stared at my reflection in the steel wall. her face pale, her eyes tired, her hair damp from the rain. I no longer recognized the woman I saw. It was like looking at someone else. When the doors opened, the corridor was dark. Only an emergency light illuminated the tiles. Chiara gestured for me to stay behind her. She moved quickly, with the confidence of someone who knows every corner of that labyrinth. We entered a small office with a computer on and piles of documents on the table. There, she said, "From this terminal we can access the admissions records." She sat down and began typing. I remained standing beside the window, watching, as the rain was falling down upon the inner courtyard. After a few minutes, Chiara exclaimed, "Found it!" A list of names, codes, dates appeared on the monitor. She scrolled quickly until she stopped on a line. There it was. Bianchi Carlo, fictitious hospitalization. April 17. Next to it, a note in red. Consent signed by spouse. Bianca Linda. She felt her heart stop for a moment. "Can I see it?" Chiara clicked on the file. My signature appeared on the screen. Perfect. But I had never touched that pen before. Under the 2 days before the call I received. "They have already activated the insurance procedure," Chiara said. "It means that the documents have been sent to the Swiss company. We have to download everything right away." She inserted a pen drive into the computer and began copying the files. Her hands moved quickly, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "How long?" I asked. "A minute, maybe 2. It was then that we heard the noise. A footstep, then another, slow, decisive, coming from the corridor door. Chiara looked up at me. "Turn off the light," I whispered. She obeyed. The room was plunged into darkness, lit only by the computer screen. Footsteps were coming closer. Then silence, a click, the handle lowering. I hid behind a shelf, holding my breath. The door opened a few inches. A figure appeared in the shadows. I couldn't see his face, but I recognized his profile. The man from the hospital, the one pushing the stretcher next to Carlo, stopped in the doorway, peering inside. Then he said softly, in a hoarse voice, "Chiara, I know you're here. It's better if you come out now. We don't want to hurt you." His tone was calm, but the threat was clear. Chiara remained motionless. The computer continued to flash. 87% of the download complete. The man took a step inside. I felt my heartbeat to become deafening. "Don't do anything stupid," he continued. "Leave that woman alone. She's none of your business. It's not in your best interest." Ida turned to me, her eyes wide, and whispered, "As soon as I say now, run. Run. And you, run." The flash drive beeped. Download complete. Chiara grabbed the device, put it in my bag, and with a quick movement opened a secondary door at the back of the office. Now she screamed. I ran. I don't remember how. Just the sound of my footsteps on the tiles and the sound of a voice shouting behind me. I crossed 2 corridors then, went down a fire escape, the lights flashing. Behind me, I heard a thud, like something falling. I turned around for a moment. The man was gone, only the door slamming into the void. I went outside and ran into the courtyard, breathing hard. The rain had gotten harder, beating on the windows and walls like a waterfall. I stopped only when I reached the gate. Chiara wasn't there. I waited a few seconds, then I saw her appear. Her face was scratched, her breathing shallow, but alive. "The wound?" I asked. "No, but we don't have much time. They know we have the evidence. We have to disappear until we deliver it." We walked to the nearest bus stop, hiding under a porch. Chiara's hands were shaking. "Where can we go?" I asked her. "I know a place, an old guest house near Nervi. It is managed by an aunt of mine, who never asks any questions." The journey lasted half an hour. Seated at the back of the bus, with our hoods raised, we appeared to be 2 ordinary women. Yet inside, I could feel a new determination growing. I was afraid, certainly, but it was that clear-headed fear that provided me with strength. Upon arriving at the guest house, an ochre-colored house with blue shutters, we were welcomed by a sturdy woman with a kind gaze. "Come in quickly," said Chiara. "Aunt, this is Linda, the lady I spoke to you about." The woman gave me a faint smile. "No one will come looking for you here. You may remain for as long as is necessary." We locked ourselves inside the smallest room with the curtains drawn. On the bedside table sat a lamp and an old crucifix. Chiara placed her bag down and sat upon the bed. We locked ourselves on the nights. We won't wait any longer. And if they follow us, they won't. Not after what happened. She looked me in the eyes and understood that she wasn't telling me everything, but I didn't insist. I lay down on the bed, exhausted. The sound of the rain against the windows lulled me like a metronome. Before falling asleep, Chiara whispered, "If I don't come tomorrow, promise that you will go to the police anyway." What does that mean? Promise, I promise. I fell asleep like that, with that promise in my throat, heavy as a stone. And when I woke up, the bed next to mine was empty. Chiara had gone. When I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in a gray, milky light. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. All I could hear was the constant sound of rain beating against the shutters and the smell of damp that permeated the air. Then I turned my head toward the bed next to me and saw that it was empty. Chiara's pillow was still a little sunken, but cold. On the nightstand there was only a half-full cup of chamomile tea and a piece of paper folded in two. I got up slowly, with heavy legs as if I had walked for miles, and took the ticket. I have to take care of something before I go to the police. Don't worry. I'll see you there at 10. I looked at my wristwatch. It was 8:40. I had an hour and 20 minutes to get to the police station, but something inside me was changing. It moved, a feeling of unease, a foreboding, that I simply was not able to ignore. I dressed quickly, put the USB stick in the inside pocket of my jacket, and went downstairs. Chiara's aunt was in the kitchen, kneading bread. "And she's already gone out early this morning," she said, without looking at me. She seemed worried. I nodded, thanked her, and went out into the cold. The city was deserted. Water ran down the sidewalks like little streams. I walked to the bus stop, but when it arrived, I didn't get on. I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. I have to fix something. What is it and where? I took a taxi and told the driver to take me home. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I had to go back there. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe I was just afraid of what I might find or don't. During the ride, I looked out the window at the narrow alleys, the wet facades, the shops slowly opening. Everything seemed normal, but I knew that beneath that normality flowed a river of lies and silences. When I arrived in front of the door of my building, I hesitated. The windows of my apartment were closed, their shutters drawn. No light filtered through. I opened it with my key and slowly climbed the stairs, holding my breath. I took a deep breath. As soon as I entered, a different smell hit me. It wasn't my home anymore. There was the scent of aftershave, the kind Carlo used only on special occasions, and the ashtray on the table was full of cigarette butts. I stopped. Someone was there, or had been there recently. I walked slowly to the living room. Everything seemed in order, but there were details that hadn't been there the night before. An open bottle of wine, 2 glasses, and a black leather wallet that is resting there on top of the armchair. I recognized it immediately. It was the one Carlo always brought with him to his business meetings. I approached, my sleeve shaking. Inside were neatly arranged sheets of paper, separated by colored tabs, and a white envelope with my name written in pen on the top. Linda, that's all. He opened it. Inside, a letter. "I imagine you've already talked to your friend from the hospital. She's a good girl, but she doesn't understand what she's got herself into. I do, and I know, by now, that you've recorded me. It doesn't matter. You won't need that flash drive to do anything. Nothing. I leave you this letter because in my own way, I loved you. But there are things bigger than us. Mechanisms you can even imagine. I suggest that you stop, Linda, before someone else takes it upon themselves to do it for you." The signature was hers. But at the bottom, there was something more. An acronym printed in small red. LC88. The same code I had seen in the personal notes.pdf file. The realization that that letter wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration, came crashing down on me. And then, next to the wallet, I noticed a dark stain on the carpet. I bent down. It was fresh. Blood. My heart jumped into my throat. Following the trail, I reached the corridor where the floor was wet, a window was open, the curtain flapping in the wind, and there, near the windowsill, I found an object that almost made me scream in the hospital bed. Chiara. My hands were shaking. I picked it up. On the back there was a small stain of dried blood. There was no doubt about it. Chiara had been there, and it wasn't by chance. I could feel my breath catching. I sat down on the floor, my mind on fire. If she had come here, she probably wanted to retrieve something. Or maybe she had discovered where Carlo kept the rest of the documents. But then where was she now? I looked at the window. It looked out onto the inner courtyard below. Only rain, silence, and 2 stray cats seeking shelter. I got up and began to rummage through every room. Everything seemed too clean, too tidy. Alone in the study, tucked behind the bookcase, I discovered something. A wall safe that featured a slot as thin as a haunting smile. Inside, there was surely evidence of everything. I tried to remember the combination. Our wedding date 04051. 988. Nothing. Then I tried the one I had seen on the file, LC80, LC8. A click. The lock had clicked. Inside lay a pile of sealed envelopes, some addressed to Swiss banks, others bearing insurance company logos, and nestled among them was a small hard drive. I took everything and put it away. I put it in my bag. But underneath the pile there was also an older yellow envelope with the name Dossier Medico, San Martino. He opened it. Inside my medical report, except the diagnosis was false. Patient, Linda Bianchi. Condition, severe heart failure prognosis. No more than 6 months smooth. Under the signature of a doctor I had never met, and his, Carlo Bianchi, as the informed spouse I get he'd formed. Was this the final blow, then? He had even falsified my health. He had created a clinical profile to justify my death and to collect the payment on my life insurance policy. And if everything had gone according to his plan, by now I should have been dead on an operating table, and he should have already been on a flight to Lisbon. I sat down, my hands in my hair, while the world spun around me. Then I heard a sound, a sharp beep coming from my phone, a message from an unknown number. Stop digging. It wasn't just him. I read and reread those words. My heart was beating fast. It wasn't just him. But then who? He opened the envelope again with the banknotes, and I saw a detail that I hadn't noticed. Any of the documents were also signed by a second name, a certain doctor. Volley. The same signature also appeared on my medical report. I searched the internet. It was a doctor from the administrative department of San Martino, the same one I had seen. Now I remembered, talking to Carlo in the hallway, the day it all began. I felt frozen. It all made sense. The fake operation, the policy, the fake hospitalization, the phone call. Everything was orchestrated with the complicity of that woman. And Chiara, poor Chiara, must have found out. I closed the safe, grabbed everything, and ran out of the house. I didn't have time. I had to get to the police station. But as I ran along the sidewalk, something inside me changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was anger. Pure, icy anger, the kind that arises when someone tries to erase you from your own life. At that moment, I swore to myself that even if it cost me everything, I would bring them all down. Carlo, Dr. Vachelali, whoever else was behind that, cursed long gone. LC88. And while the rain intensified and the bells at the harbor struck 10, I realized that this would be the final time I would ever feel fear, because now I possessed everything and had absolutely nothing left to lose. I don't remember ever running so much in my life. The rain was falling in buckets, heavy as nails on the cobblestones, and my shoes were slipping on the shiny sidewalk. But I didn't stop. I was running as if every single step were a battle against the time. I had my bag clutched to my chest. Inside the flash drive, the documents, the evidence. My whole life reduced to a few wet sheets of paper. When I arrived in front of the police station, my hands were shaking. The gray building looked like a stone fortress. I ran in, dripping with water, and headed towards the reception. "I need to speak to Inspector Gallo," I said, panting. "It's urgent." The people at the counter looked at me perplexed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he's waiting for me." "Tell him, please. It's a matter of life and death." The man hesitated. Then he dialed a number, spoke softly, then nodded. "Second floor, office 214. Inspector Gallo's office was a small room which was filled with many files and a collection of empty coffee cups. A man in his 50s with graying hair and light eyes looked at me from behind a cluttered desk. "You must be Mrs. Bianchi," he said. "I was informed that you would become. Please." And so I told him from the beginning, from the day of the phone call from the hospital until that morning. Going through Chiara, the flash drive, the documents, the safe, I talked for almost an hour without stopping. When he finished, Gallo remained silent, then took the flash drive and inserted it a few seconds into the recording with Carlo. His face changed. "You did the right thing by coming here," he said. "This is damning evidence. But I have to warn you, Mrs. Bianchi. This story is bigger than you think. We've been investigating an international fraud ring linked to private clinics and offshore companies for months. Your husband is no small fry. He's one of the coordinators." My blood ran cold. "Coordinators?" "Yes. And if she really did find what she says, we can dismantle the entire structure, but she has to be ready to testify, and she'll have to be under protection for some time." I nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes." He nodded to his colleague at the door. "Call the patrol. Let's go get the other witness, the girl from the hospital." I looked down. "Chiara's not here. She disappeared this morning." His gaze darkened. "Gone. She left a note, and it said that she had to go and fix something. Then I found her bloody badge at my house." Gallo stood up abruptly. "Damn it. Maybe they figured out she was cooperating." He put on his coat and grabbed his car keys. "Let's go to the hospital right away. Maybe she's still alive." The drive took less than 10 minutes. The sirens were piercing the air as I stared out of the window, my hands held tightly against my knees. The sky had darkened, almost black. When we arrived at San Martino, the lobby was full of people, but the inspector pushed his way through with authority. Judicial police, no one move. We went up to the 3rd floor, the administration building. The doors were closed. The air smelled of ammonia and fear. At the end of the corridor, a light flickered. Gallo pulled out his gun and advanced slowly. I followed him, even though my legs were shaking. The office door was ajar. Inside, the room was trashed, documents everywhere, chairs overturned. And there, next to the desk, was Chiara, lying on the floor, her face pale, but she was breathing. I knelt down beside her, took her hand. Chiara, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes with difficulty. Linda whispered, "Don't talk, it's over, we're here." She shook her head slowly. "No, it's not over. There's another name. Look for Valley." The fingers twitched on my hand, then relaxed. She fainted. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. I remained sitting on the ground, with her blood on my hands, while it carried her away. Gallo put a blanket over my shoulders. "She's alive," he said. "She's lost a lot of blood, but she'll make it." "Who did this?" He clenched his jaw. "We'll find out soon enough." 2 hours later, as I waited in a room at the police station, Gallo returned. He had an expression on his face that I'll never forget. "We've caught him," he said. He was at a doctor's house. He was about to leave. He already had a ticket to Nice. It took me a moment to understand. Carlo nodded, and Dr. Valli is with him. We'll question them separately. I felt my legs give out. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The idea that he was there, in the same building, a few meters away from me, paralyzed me, but at the same time, something inside me ignited. It was the end of everything he had built on my skin. "Do you want to see it?" Gallo asked me. Did I look at it? Yes. They walked me along a cold corridor until we reached her, with a large glass window. On the other side, sitting at a metal table, was Carlo, his hands handcuffed, his gaze steady, icy. He laughed at me, a slow, venomous smile. "I told you he was bigger than us," he said, when they allowed him to speak. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. I'm not the monster. I'm just a man who found a way to stop being a slave. They are the real masters." "They who?" Gallo asked. Carlo looked at him with an almost superhuman calm. "You'll see them soon, when it's your turn." I just followed orders. I stood up, unable to listen any longer. Linda called my name. I turned around. "You won? But at what price?" I stared at him one last time. The price of freedom is always high. Carlo, you never understood. He left the room. Outside, the air was cold but clear. After days of rain, a ray of sunshine pierced the clouds and illuminated the courtyard of the police headquarters. Chiara was in the hospital, under protection. Dr. Valli had been arrested that same morning, and all of the accounts belonging to Carini Investments had been officially frozen. The name LLC 88 would end up all over the news, and I returned home for the first time without fear. The apartment was still a battlefield, but I cleaned it slowly and patiently. Every object I put back in its place was like a breath regained. In the evening, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, I turned on the radio. A voice was reading the local news. An international network of insurance fraud between Genoa and Zurich had been discovered. 2 main suspects had been arrested, a financial advisor and a doctor from San Martino. The investigation continues. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. Only a sense of peace, subtle, almost imperceptible. Then I pulled out a small blue shell from the drawer, the one I had bought at the market months before, when I still thought my life was over. I put it next to the window. The sea in the distance was shining under the moon. I picked up my phone and wrote a message to Chiara. We made it. Rest. See you soon. I sent it, then turned off the phone. Looked around. The silence finally didn't scare me anymore because it was mine. And for the first time, after a long time, I took a deep breath and said to myself, quietly, but with absolute certainty, I am no longer anyone's victim.